Good afternoon. My name is Roz Elder, president of the Tulsa City County Friends of the Library. On behalf of Book Sandwiched In, I would like to welcome you to the last Book Sandwiched In of 2025, sponsored by the Friends of the Tulsa City County Libraries. Today, Adrian Alexander will be talking about the works of the Peggy Helmrich Award winner, Hernán Díaz. Book Sandwiched In will resume in February, so mark your calendars for that, with a wonderful new slate of books to present. So I hope to see you all next year. I want to share with you a few words about the Friends of the Libraries. Friends not only puts on Book Sandwiched In and travels with Tulsans, which I know you all are familiar with. We also sponsor an adult creative writing contest each year and assist with promoting Great Decisions, a foreign and domestic policy study group with multiple groups throughout the city. That's just a few of the friends of the activities that we do. So if you're not already a friend, we have membership forms on the counter or online. You can become a member for as little as $15, and that $15 or more of your dues helps us continue to provide these great programs and activities. Thank you again for being here. Now, I'm excited to introduce today's speaker, Adrian Alexander. Be sure you see a picture of his Maine Coon cat. Amazing. We've been having lots of fun discussing. You're really. Adrian Alexander has served as the first R.M. and Ida McFarland Dean of the Library at the University of Tulsa. Sorry, everybody. Can you see it now? There we go. Thank you. Adrian Alexander served as the first R.M. and Ida McFarland Dean of the Library at the University of Tulsa from February of 2007 until his retirement in 2022. He holds a master's degree in library science from the University of North Texas and has worked in a variety of roles in the information industry over the past 40 years plus. More importantly today, however, I love this, Adrian has loved reading books, many, many books, in fact, for as long as he can remember, and he became an avid public library user, as many of us did at a very young age. He is honored to have served as a member of the Helmrich Distinguished Author Award Selection Committee beginning in 2007, including 8 years as chair of this committee. And now, here to discuss Hernán Díaz's works is Adrian Alexander.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thanks for venturing out in our inclement weather today. And I'm glad to hear that we've got several people online as well. They took the wise route, maybe. I don't know. Well, thank you again for inviting me back to talk about this year's recipient of the Peggy B. Helmrich Distinguished Author Award, Hernán Díaz. Dr. Díaz is unique among the 39 authors who have received this prestigious award for two reasons, I think. Most importantly, he's the first Latin American author selected for the Helmrich Prize. Seems odd to me that it's taken that long, but more interestingly, perhaps, is that he's only published 3 books, and I'm going to talk about a couple of those soon. The quantity of output isn't necessarily the most important measure of a writer, as we all know, and in this case, the relative impact on literature per page is quite extraordinary for him. The first book he published in 2012 was a critical work that examined the writing and the legacy of the renowned South American writer and critic José Luis Borges. We're not going to talk about that book. It's far too academic. But his second work was also his very first novel, In the Distance, which came out in 2017 and was a finalist for the 2018 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and the PEN/Faulkner Award for Fiction. Again, his very first novel. And then book number 3, Trust, came out in 2022 and won the 2023 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. So in terms of impact per page on world literature, you could make an argument that Hernán Díaz is right up there at the top. Our distinguished author's personal journey to fame as a writer is an interesting one as well. He was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina in 1973, and you may recall that's the same year as the infamous dictator Juan Perón was returned from exile following a coup and regained the presidency in October. Díaz's family, who were intellectuals, moved to Sweden for the first 10 years of his life and returned to Argentina in 1983. He earned his undergraduate degree at the University of Buenos Aires and then moved to London, where he earned an MA in comparative literature at King's College. He went on from there in 1999 to New York University, where he received his PhD from the Department of Spanish and Portuguese Literature and Language, and he still lives in New York with his family. So I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about these two extraordinary novels that are very different from each other, I'll add. How many, just off top of that, how many have read some of Díaz's work already? So anybody who has read both of them? Okay, good. So you know what I'm talking about then. In the Distance has been described in various reviews as turning the genre of the conventional Western upside down, an ambitious and thoroughly realized work of revisionist historical fiction, strange and transporting, as if Herman Melville had navigated the American West instead of the ocean, and something like Huckleberry Finn written by Cormac McCarthy. I like that one especially because McCarthy immediately came to my mind when I started reading it. And then finally, a singular and deeply affecting portrait of one man's life in a rapidly changing world. That's an understatement in this case. Now, the setting for this book is the American West before the Civil War, and sometime toward the end of the California gold rush. And during this period, there was a large-scale immigration from Europe to the United States that was caused all over Central and Western Europe, even Eastern Europe to some extent. And it was caused by a combination of factors, including economic hardship, agricultural crises, religious freedom, and political unrest in some countries. Two of these immigrants are Linus Söderström and his younger brother Håkan. They're bound for New York. They're from Sweden, and they're bound for New York when they get separated on the wharf in Portsmouth, where they're supposed to catch another boat to New York. And Håkan ends up on the wrong ship and is now bound for San Francisco. He has no English, but he's a fast learner, and he becomes convinced that he can find New York and his brother if he just heads east. So he ventures out into the wild American west of that period. And along the way, he acquires the name Hawk because that was as close as most Americans get to pronouncing his very difficult. I don't even come close to it. It's Håkan or something like that. He's known as the Hawk. He's a very large man. And he acquires along the way. And the time frame of this book is over in several decades. Before it ends. And he's had to depend on his own wits and his own bravery and his own capabilities to survive in some places. He's abused by some people in different ways, almost murdered a couple of times. And he truly is amongst a cavalcade of characters that would be, in fact, right at home in Cormac McCarthy's Gothic Western Blood Meridian, if you know that book. Obviously, he never gets to New York or finds his brother, of course, and a good many years go, several decades, in fact, before the story ends. I won't go into detail about that. As the New York Times reviewer observed, Håkan starves and thirsts. He survives and grows in sorrowful wisdom and inexplicably to colossal size. And though he murders and maims and becomes a notorious outlaw, he is disgusted and ultimately shattered by his violence. Now, for Trust, a completely different novel, this book takes us to the other side of the U.S. continent a few decades later in New York City, a far cry from, in more ways than one, from the bloody violent West of In the Distance. The structure of this book is somewhat unique and rightly considered metafictional, although I'm not entirely sure of the definition sometimes of it gets used a lot these days, and I'm not sure if it's always accurate. But in this book, there are 4 different narratives, but they're all about 2 of the 3 main characters, Andrew Bevel and his wife Mildred, whom Andrew weds in the middle age. And Bevel is one of the wealthiest men in America, from a family of wealthy merchants and financiers that stretches back to the beginning of the country. He's proud of his bloodline and even more proud of his immense wealth. Mildred is from a wealthy family as well. And this marriage is built not on love, but on mutual respect for each other. They have different interests. Helen supports local musical artists with her money, which Andrew seems to see as a waste of good money. Part 1 of the book is titled Bonds, and it's an unauthorized novel about Andrew Bevel by a writer called Harold Vanner. We never meet Harold Vanner in the book at all. We just know that he has written this book. In his characterization of Bevel, named here as Benjamin Rask, he takes particular aim at how the Rask fortune somehow dodged the Wall Street crash of 1929, while many other investors were wiped out, of course. Bevel is accused by friends of manipulating the market. And New York society, I should say Rask in this case, the friends of and manipulating the market in New York society turns against them. Mildred, who is now Helen in the novel, descends into madness and severe eczema and retires to a Swiss sanatorium where her own mentally ill father died. Impatient with her progress, Benjamin allows her to undergo convulsive therapy, which I took to mean shock therapy, which ultimately kills her. We go then at the end of that, with Mildred's death, we go to part 2, which is titled My Life. And this is Bevel's autobiographic attempt to rebut characterization of him presented in Bonds. Bevel's narrative focus is on the family of financiers and its 2 guiding principles, making their own conditions for success and conflating personal gain with public virtue. He credits his marriage to Mildred for much of his success and describes how she saved him in small ways in which she helped him make his home more domestic. Mildred is eventually diagnosed with cancer and dies. Further into the text, the writing becomes degraded, and with editorial notes to return and expand the text. Part 3 is titled A Memoir Remembered, and is the work of a woman called Ida Partenza. She's a 23-year-old at the time from Brooklyn, from a working class family, and she becomes Andrew Bevel's ghostwriter for this book. Ida takes the job and becomes increasingly intrigued, however, by Mildred, whom Bevel describes in demeaning terms, but who was clearly a very intelligent and sophisticated woman. Before the memoir is finished, Bevel dies, and Ida later becomes a novelist. In her 70s, she begins researching Mildred, and she discovers in the library that's in the old Bevel mansion an uncatalogued diary belonging to Mildred, and she steals it. And that takes us to part 4, which is the diary, and it's titled Futures. And from it, a number of interesting truths are revealed. Mildred confesses that she regularly corresponded with Harold Vanner for Bonds, suggesting that she helped him in some other way with the book. This would, of course, been disastrous for her if Andrew had ever found out. So it comes as somewhat of a surprise when you get to that part of the book. I had no idea that might have happened. But there's so much more in Mildred's amazing diary, which I consider the most beautifully written part of the entire book. I literally had to stop several times and just go back and reread some of the prose because it really was so evocative, and it was so different in so many ways from the other sections of the book. I just thought it was so gorgeous. One of the best pieces of fiction I've read in a long time was that part 4. One critic described it as a rare fractal beauty. Patterns first noticeable in the tiny twigs of its sentences recur in the branches of its sections, and yet again in the shape as the whole. And so to write such extraordinary novels as Trust and In the Distance so early on in his career is an extraordinary achievement. And I think you can see now why the author selection committee selected Hernán Díaz as this year's recipient for the award. I was going to add also that I think I left something out here somewhere. No, I didn't. No, I was just going to say I could tell you a lot more about part 4, but it will spoil a lot of the ending of the book, and I think the ending of the book is the most powerful piece of it. So I'm not going to go any further into that part. So those of you who have read the book, I think, understand what I'm talking about, and probably hopefully agree that part 4 is really extraordinary. I learned in some of my research that he has completed a 3rd novel. It's titled Ply. Don't know anything about what it's about. Ply. So, and it's finished, but I think it was when Julie Chen on whichever channel she's on was interviewing him just a few days ago. She mentioned it, and he said it's at the editors now, but no publication date. So I'm really anxious to find out more of what it is. Not knowing a lot about Díaz previously until he came up as a candidate, as a nominee for this award, he didn't have a track record to my mind, because I wasn't familiar with either of his books until the notices came out about the Pulitzer. And as we said, his body of work is pretty small at this point, but very significant, obviously. So at first I was a little, as I got into that first part of Trust, in fact, myself, reading that part 1, which is the Harold Vanner novel fiction representation of Andrew Bevel, I was kind of turned off. I didn't think it was well written, but I understand now why it wasn't compared to the rest of the book. But you have to get through the whole book to really appreciate the work itself. If you haven't read it yet, don't let part 1 of the book steer you away from it, because it's worth staying with. Until I got to part 4, I thought the part 3 with Ida Partenza and her viewpoint, because she had a pretty interesting life herself. Her father was actually he was a typographer, and he was also an anarchist, and so she came from a very different background from the Bevels. But the connection between Bevel and Ida Partenza was particularly interesting, and how she viewed that family and took in all of how different that was compared to what her life was like. So I think it really is a marvelous book, and I think he's going to be a really great speaker. I should note, as we always try to do, remind everyone that there is a public presentation that Dr. Díaz will do, and that's going to be, rather than the Saturday mornings we used to do, it's going to be Thursday afternoon, and that will be at Central Library downtown starting at 5:30, I believe. Is that right? Okay. And having only 2 books to really talk about, I don't have too much more to say, but I'd be glad to answer any questions that you have about the books, or any comments you have, any of your thoughts about especially Trust. But if you read the other one as well, that was a remarkable book in its own way, I think. I can tell you a little bit about it. We all come each year with some new authors in mind that we've discovered. Along with, there are always some that were on the list before that we will take up again. And we typically have we usually start in the summer sometime and meet monthly until we've changed the schedule a couple of times, but it's about 3 or 4 meetings that we have on a monthly basis where we discuss the books. We get everybody's input on them, and we have discussions about the relative merits of them. Toward the end, when we sort of narrow things down to a smaller list, the staff at the library who work with the committee will go out and they will find YouTube videos of the authors in venues like this talking to public audiences, because we want to. In the past, there have been a few times when we had some speakers that weren't that great at, I can't recall any since I've been on the committee, but I had heard stories about some in the past that were didn't go over great with a general audience, I guess. So we look at those and see how they are in that kind of setting, and then we finally narrow it down, and we finally get to 3, and we always keep 3 in mind. We always have a backup just in case something happens. Just a few years ago, when we were supposed to have Elizabeth Strout here, and she got injured in Germany, I think she was and our good friend Ann Patchett from Nashville came to our rescue. Yes, and Tony Hillerman died, and so these things happen, and especially because we're always picking a ways out, and so things can change, and so it's always good to have a backup or two. And so, but I was telling someone else earlier, we've actually, a lot of people have been on this committee for even longer than I have. But we've got several new, fresh names on the committee as well. We brought in some really good new perspectives on bibliophiles like us who read, but sometimes read in different areas than we do. So it's a good, well-rounded group of people, and it's always fun to get together and talk books with them. So I'm happy when I retired from TU, I almost dropped out. I took a little sabbatical, and I almost didn't come back, and then I started missing it. And I emailed Peggy and said, could I please come back? And she said, yes, you can, of course. So I'm happy to be back, and I'm happy to talk to you and about this author that I didn't know that well, but I'm glad I know him now, and I'm really interested in meeting him. The committee always gets to have lunch with the author, so we always look forward to that. And I'm sure I'll have a lot of questions for him. So thank you for coming out on such a beautiful day. And be careful driving home. There's still a lot of crazy people out on the roads, I suspect. And for those of you at home coming in on Zoom, well played. You did the right thing, probably. So thank you again very much.